Meredith's heart raced as she stepped through the wrought iron gates of the old cemetery. It had been years since she last visited her mother's grave, and the weight of grief still lingered heavily upon her. The moon cast an eerie glow over the weathered tombstones, and a chill wind whispered through the trees, sending shivers down Meredith's spine. As she approached her mother's resting place, a sense of unease washed over her. The air felt thick with an unseen presence, and the silence was suffocating. Meredith knelt before the headstone, brushing away fallen leaves to reveal her mother's name etched in stone. A single tear slipped down her cheek as memories flooded back. Suddenly, a faint sound echoed through the cemetery, like whispers carried on the wind. Meredith froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She strained to listen, but the words were unintelligible, mere murmurs from the shadows. Fear gnawed at her insides as she scanned the darkness, searching for the source of the haunting whispers. A cold gust of wind swept through the graveyard, extinguishing the flickering candle Meredith had brought to light her mother's grave. Panic seized her as darkness enveloped her, and she stumbled backward, tripping over a gnarled root hidden beneath the fallen leaves. She landed hard on the ground, the impact knocking the wind from her lungs. Struggling to catch her breath, Meredith cast a desperate glance around the cemetery. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, surrounding her like a sinister chorus. She scrambled to her feet, her pulse racing with terror, and fled toward the gates, the echoes of the tombstones haunting her every step. Just as she reached the safety of the gates, Meredith chanced to glance back at her mother's grave. In the moonlight, she saw a figure standing among the headstones, its features obscured by shadows. A chill ran down her spine as she realized the figure was facing her, its eyes gleaming with an otherworldly light. With a cry of fear, Meredith tore her gaze away and fled into the night, the echoes of the tombstones following her like ghostly whispers on the wind. For days afterward, Meredith couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over her. The whispers of the cemetery haunted her dreams, and she found herself drawn back to the old graveyard again and again, as if compelled by some unseen force. Each night, as she wandered among the tombstones, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they filled her mind with a cacophony of voices. Meredith tried to block them out, but their words echoed in her ears, driving her to the brink of madness. One night, as she stood before her mother's grave, the whispers reached a fever pitch, and Meredith felt a cold hand close around her heart. She turned to flee, but the figure she had seen before was waiting for her, its eyes glowing with an unearthly light. With a cry of terror, Meredith turned and ran, the echoes of the tombstones following her into the night, their voices merging with her own screams as she disappeared into the darkness. David had to pass through the cemetery every day to get home from school. There was no other way, and it didn't bother him until that fateful day. One day, while working on a project with his friend Peter at school, they lost track of time. The sun was setting, and David realized he needed to hurry home. However, the only way was through the cemetery, and darkness was beginning to fall. David hesitated, but time was running out, and he had to go through the cemetery. Feeling his heart racing, he set out on the path. The cemetery was quiet, with only the faint breeze and the rustling of the trees. As David walked along the cemetery, he felt something was wrong. Strange figures seemed to appear in the shadows of the gravestones, but every time he looked, he saw nothing. Sweating profusely, he began to walk faster. Suddenly, he heard a strange sound behind him. Footsteps, as if someone were following him. David panicked, increasing his pace, but the sounds wouldn't stop. As he ran between the tombstones, something tripped him, and he fell to the ground. As soon as he fell, he was surrounded by darkness. He tried to scream, but his voice caught in his throat. Suddenly, from within the enveloping darkness, He heard a voice. "Welcome, David. I've been expecting you." Trembling with fear, David saw a hand emerging from the shadow reaching out to him. He recoiled in panic, but the darkness closed tightly around him. David wandered helplessly in a dark labyrinth, screaming for help, but his voice only echoed into the void. The cemetery passage had trapped him, and there was no turning back. Emily and Sarah had been best friends since childhood, sharing everything from secrets to adventures. One moonlit night, Sarah came up with the idea of exploring the cemetery after dark. Emily was initially hesitant, but Sarah's enthusiasm and persuasive arguments eventually convinced her. As they ventured into the cemetery, the moon cast eerie shadows over the tombstones, and a cool breeze whispered through the trees. Emily's nerves were on edge, but Sarah's excitement was infectious, and she pushed her fears aside. They wandered deeper into the cemetery, Sarah leading the way with a flashlight in hand. The gravestones loomed like silent sentinels in the darkness, and Emily couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. Suddenly, a strange sound broke the silence, causing both girls to freeze in their tracks. It was a soft, mournful whistle, unlike anything they had ever heard before. Emily's heart raced as she exchanged a nervous glance with Sarah, who tried to brush it off as the wind, but the eerie feeling persisted as they continued their exploration. Emily's skin prickled with unease, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. Sarah, however, remained undeterred, her curiosity driving her forward. As they reached the heart of the cemetery, they saw a faint light flickering among the tombstones. Emily's breath caught in her throat as they approached cautiously, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. What they saw next chilled them to the bone. A figure, pale and ghostly, emerged from the darkness, its eyes gleaming with an otherworldly light. Emily's blood ran cold as she realized they were not alone in the cemetery. Panic surged through her veins as she turned to run, but Sarah's hand gripped hers tightly. "Don't be afraid," she whispered, her voice strangely calm. "It's just a trick of the light." But Emily knew better. There was something malevolent about the figure before them, something that sent a shiver down her spine. With a sense of dread creeping over her, she followed Sarah as they backed away slowly, their eyes never leaving the ghostly apparition. As they reached the safety of the cemetery gates, Emily dared to glance back one last time. The figure had vanished into the darkness, leaving them shaken but unharmed. As they hurried home, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they had stumbled upon something beyond their understanding, something that lurked in the shadows of the cemetery, waiting to be discovered.